17-year-old Thomas Michael T.J. Lane III stood before Geauga County Common Pleas Judge David Furry in the courtroom in Chardon, Ohio, on March 19, 2013, wearing what appeared to be a standard blue button-down shirt over a white t-shirt, his sandy brown hair neatly combed, and his expression blank as Judge Furry prepared to sentence him for the murders of 3 students: 16-year-old Demetrius Hewlin, 16-year-old Russell King Jr., and 17-year-old Daniel Parmator, and the attempted murders of 3 other students whom TJ had shot during a premeditated attack in the Chardon High School cafeteria on February 27, 2012, when TJ was just 17 years old. An attack where he walked calmly into the crowded cafeteria during morning breakfast period, pulled a .22 caliber pistol from his backpack, and systematically shot 6 students at point-blank range, while other students screamed and ran for their lives, killing 3 and leaving the other 3 with permanent injuries and psychological trauma. Before we continue with this disturbing case, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support is what allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. For the 13 months between the shooting in February 2012 and the sentencing hearing in March 2013, investigators, prosecutors, the devastated Chardon community, and the nation watched this case unfold with horror and bewilderment, trying to understand why T.J. Lane, a quiet, troubled teenager who attended an alternative school for at-risk youth, but who had no documented history of making threats against Chardon High School or the specific students he targeted, had chosen to commit mass murder against classmates he barely knew in a school he didn't even attend full-time. The attack shocked the small, tight-knit community of Chardon, a town of approximately 5,000 people in northeast Ohio, where violent crime was virtually non-existent and where the high school had been considered safe, a place where students should have been able to eat breakfast and prepare for classes without fear of being gunned down by a peer carrying a semi-automatic pistol. But what truly horrified everyone who witnessed the sentencing hearing on March 19, 2013, what transformed this from a tragic school shooting case into a shocking display of pure evil and contempt for human life, was T.J. Lane's behavior during the victim impact statements and his own statement to the court. As the families of Demetrius Hewlin, Russell King Jr., and Daniel Parmator delivered tearful, anguished statements describing the beloved sons they had lost and the permanent devastation TJ's actions had caused, TJ sat at the defense table with a smirk on his face, occasionally smiling, making dismissive gestures, showing absolutely no remorse or empathy for the suffering he had caused. Then, in the most shocking moment, as Judge Furry gave TJ the opportunity to make a statement before sentencing, TJ unbuttoned his blue shirt to reveal a white t-shirt underneath, on which he had written in black marker the single word killer, raised his middle finger to the victims' families sitting in the gallery, and delivered a profanity-laced statement ending with, "This hand that pulled the trigger that killed your sons now masturbates to the memory. Fuck all of you." Words so vile and shocking that they left the courtroom in stunned silence and caused the prosecutor to tell the judge that TJ had just proven beyond any doubt that he was a disgusting human being who deserved the absolute maximum punishment available under Ohio law. Judge David Furry, who had presided over the case with measured professionalism and who had carefully considered all the factors relevant to sentencing, including TJ's age and difficult background, had planned to sentence TJ to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, already an extremely harsh sentence, that would ensure TJ would die in prison decades from now, having never experienced adult freedom. But TJ's courtroom behavior, his smirking during victim testimony, his killer shirt, his obscene gesture, and his vile statement transformed the judge's demeanor from measured consideration to visible anger and disgust. When Judge Furry pronounced sentence, 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, meaning TJ Lane would serve a minimum of 228 years before becoming eligible for release, essentially ensuring he would never leave prison alive, with Judge Furry stating from the bench that TJ's behavior had confirmed what everyone suspected, that he was a remorseless, evil individual who posed a permanent danger to society and who deserved to spend every remaining day of his life locked in a cage paying for the 3 lives he had stolen. The smirk finally faded from TJ's face as the crushing reality of truly never being free again sank in, his attempt to appear tough and unbothered by the proceedings crumbling as bailiffs moved to take him away to begin his life sentences. Thomas Michael Lane III, known as TJ, to distinguish him from his father Thomas Lane Jr., was born on September 19, 1994, in Chardon, Ohio, into a family plagued by violence, addiction, criminal behavior, and profound dysfunction that would shape every aspect of his development and contribute to the rage and nihilism that would eventually manifest in mass murder. TJ's father, Thomas Lane Jr., was a violent criminal with an extensive record including charges for domestic violence, assault, kidnapping, and other serious offenses. Thomas Jr. was abusive toward TJ's mother and toward the children, creating a home environment characterized by fear, violence, and chaos during TJ's earliest years. When TJ was approximately 2 years old in 1996, his parents' relationship deteriorated to the point where his mother sought protection from the court, filing for divorce and obtaining restraining orders against Thomas Lane Jr. based on documented domestic violence and threats. The divorce proceedings revealed a horrifying pattern of abuse, with court documents describing incidents where Thomas Jr. had violently assaulted TJ's mother in the presence of the children, had threatened to kill family members, and had created an atmosphere of terror in the home. The court granted the divorce and gave custody of TJ and his siblings to their mother, with Thomas Jr. receiving limited supervised visitation rights due to his documented violence and danger to the family. But removing Thomas Lane Jr. from the home didn't solve the family's problems. TJ's mother struggled to provide stability for her children as a single parent dealing with her own trauma from the abuse she had suffered, working to support the family and trying to manage TJ and his siblings, who were displaying behavioral and emotional problems stemming from their early exposure to violence. TJ, even as a young child, showed signs of significant psychological disturbance. He was aggressive toward other children, had violent outbursts and tantrums, showed cruelty toward animals, and displayed the kind of early warning signs that child psychologists recognize as indicators of serious conduct disorder and potential for future violence. Throughout his elementary and middle school years, TJ's behavioral problems escalated. He was frequently in trouble at school for fighting, threatening other students, defying teachers' authority, and showing concerning violent ideation. He had few friends, and those he did associate with described him as angry, unpredictable, and sometimes frightening. TJ was evaluated by school counselors and psychologists multiple times, and he received diagnoses including attention deficit disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, and depression. He was prescribed various psychiatric medications to help manage his aggression and emotional dysregulation, but compliance with medication was inconsistent, and the interventions seemed to have minimal effect on his trajectory. By the time TJ reached high school age, his behavioral problems were so severe that he was not able to attend Chardon High School full-time with his peers. Instead, TJ was enrolled at Lake Academy, an alternative school for at-risk youth located in nearby Willoughby, Ohio, approximately 30 miles from Chardon. Lake Academy served students who had significant behavioral, emotional, or academic problems that prevented them from succeeding in traditional high school settings, providing smaller class sizes, more intensive support, and structured environments designed to help struggling youth get back on track. TJ attended Lake Academy during most of the school week, but he was transported to Chardon High School 1 or 2 mornings per week to take a specific vocational class that wasn't offered at Lake Academy. This arrangement meant that TJ was on the Chardon High School campus occasionally, arriving in the morning via school bus with other students from Lake Academy who had similar split enrollment arrangements. But TJ was not integrated into the regular Chardon High School student body. He didn't eat lunch there regularly, didn't participate in extracurricular activities, didn't socialize with Chardon students. He was essentially a visitor to the campus, someone who arrived for a specific class and then left, someone most Chardon students didn't know or recognize. During his time at Lake Academy, TJ's behavior continued to cause concern. He was frequently in trouble for defiance, for threatening other students, for making disturbing statements about violence. Teachers and staff at Lake Academy noted that TJ seemed consumed with anger and resentment, that he expressed nihilistic views about life having no meaning or purpose, that he sometimes made statements suggesting he fantasized about violence. But like many troubled teenagers, TJ's concerning statements were difficult to distinguish from typical adolescent edginess and depression. He never made specific threats against Lake Academy or Chardon High School, never told anyone, "I'm going to shoot people at school," never laid out a concrete plan that would have triggered mandatory reporting and intervention. The warning signs were there in retrospect. TJ's documented history of violence and aggression, his fascination with dark and violent content, his nihilistic worldview, his anger and social isolation, his documented threats against other students at Lake Academy. But without a specific credible threat against a particular target, authorities lacked legal grounds to remove TJ from school or to take more aggressive intervention measures. He was receiving mental health services through Lake Academy. He was on psychiatric medication when he remembered to take it. And he was in an alternative educational setting designed for students with his issues. The system was doing what it could, but it wasn't enough to prevent what was coming. In the months leading up to February 2012, TJ's social media posts and private writings, later recovered by investigators, revealed his increasingly dark and violent thoughts. He wrote poetry and posts expressing hatred for humanity, describing people as worthless and deserving of death. He wrote about feeling rejected and mocked by peers, about wanting revenge against a world that had treated him badly. In one particularly chilling post recovered after the shooting, TJ had written, "I will cause the biggest crime in Chardon's history. They'll remember me forever." These writings, discovered only after the shooting when investigators searched TJ's online presence and belongings, showed clear premeditation and planning. TJ had been fantasizing about committing mass murder for some time before February 27, 2012. TJ had access to firearms through his family. Despite his father's criminal history and domestic violence record, guns were present in relatives' homes where TJ visited or stayed. On February 26, 2012, the day before the shooting, TJ stole a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol from his grandfather's house. He took the gun without permission, along with ammunition, and brought it to the home where he was living with an uncle. TJ spent the evening of February 26th preparing for the attack, loading the weapon, putting the gun and extra ammunition in his backpack, preparing the clothing he would wear, and apparently building up his psychological readiness to commit murder. The victims TJ would shoot the next morning were not bullies who had tormented him, not people who had significantly wronged him, not even students he knew well. Demetrius Hewlin, Russell King Jr., and Daniel Palmator were juniors and seniors at Chardon High School, who TJ knew only superficially or not at all. They weren't his enemies. They were simply students who happened to be sitting in the cafeteria when TJ decided to open fire. The randomness of the target selection was one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. These three boys died not because they had done anything to TJ, but because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time when a rage-filled teenager decided to act out his violent fantasies. On the morning of February 27, 2012, TJ woke up, got dressed, put the loaded pistol and extra ammunition in his backpack, and boarded the school bus that would take him and other Lake Academy students to Chardon High School for their morning classes. The bus ride was approximately 30 minutes, during which TJ sat quietly showing no outward signs of the violence he was about to commit. Other students on the bus later told investigators they hadn't noticed anything unusual about TJ that morning. He wasn't agitated or visibly nervous, wasn't making threats or strange statements. He was just sitting quietly with his backpack, presumably going to class like any other day. The bus arrived at Chardon High School around 7:30 a.m. Students from the bus, including TJ, entered the building and went to the cafeteria, where many students gathered before first period to eat breakfast, socialize, and prepare for the day. The cafeteria was crowded with approximately 100 students that morning, creating the typical chaotic energy of teenagers socializing before classes began. TJ entered the cafeteria and stood near the entrance for a moment, scanning the room, apparently identifying his targets or simply preparing himself psychologically for what he was about to do. Then, without warning, without any verbal confrontation or precipitating incident, TJ reached into his backpack, pulled out the .22 caliber pistol, and began shooting. The first shot struck students sitting at a table near where TJ stood. 16-year-old Demetrius Hewlin and 17-year-old Daniel Palmator were hit immediately, both suffering gunshot wounds to the head at close range. As students began screaming and running, realizing that someone was shooting, TJ calmly continued firing, hitting 16-year-old Russell King Jr., also with shots to the head and torso. TJ then moved through the cafeteria, shooting at other students as they tried to flee or hide under tables. He shot and wounded 3 additional students. Nick Woolsack, who was shot and suffered spinal cord damage that left him paralyzed from the waist down. Joy Rickers, who was shot in the buttocks and leg. And Nate Mueller, who was grazed by a bullet. The entire attack lasted approximately 30 seconds, half a minute during which TJ Lane methodically shot 6 students, killing 3 and wounding 3, in front of dozens of terrified witnesses who watched their classmates being gunned down. After TJ had fired his last shot, either because his gun jammed or he ran out of loaded ammunition, he fled the cafeteria and exited the school building, running from the campus as teachers and staff began responding to the shooting, trying to help wounded students and account for everyone. Inside the cafeteria, the scene was nightmarish, students crying and screaming, 3 students lying on the floor with catastrophic gunshot wounds, blood everywhere. Absolute chaos as teachers tried to provide first aid, while also evacuating the remaining students to safety. 16-year-old Demetrius Hewlin had been shot in the head and was critically wounded. He was rushed to Hillcrest Hospital, where trauma surgeons fought desperately to save his life, but his injuries were too severe. Demetrius died the next morning, February 28, 2012, surrounded by his family, who had maintained vigil at his bedside praying for a miracle that never came. Demetrius was a beloved student, an athlete who played football, a young man with a bright future who had dreams of attending college and building a career. His family would later describe him as kind, funny, someone who lit up every room he entered, qualities that made his senseless murder even more devastating. 17-year-old Daniel Parmeter had also been shot in the head at close range. He was transported to Metro Health Medical Center in Cleveland, where doctors worked frantically to save him. But like Demetrius, Daniel's injuries were unsurvivable. He was pronounced dead later on February 27th, just hours after TJ shot him. Daniel was a junior at Chardon High School, a student who enjoyed computers and technology, who had a girlfriend he loved and a family who adored him. His mother, Dina Parmeter, would later deliver one of the most powerful victim impact statements at TJ's sentencing, telling TJ that he was a pathetic excuse for a human being and that she wished him an extremely slow, torturous death. 16-year-old Russell King Jr. was also shot in the head and suffered catastrophic brain trauma. He was transported to Hillcrest Hospital in critical condition. Russell's family maintained vigil at his bedside, praying and hoping he would survive, but his injuries were too severe. Russell died on March 3, 2012, 5 days after the shooting, making him the third fatality from TJ Lane's rampage. Russell was known for his kindness and his love of sports, particularly baseball. He had a close relationship with his family and many friends who were devastated by his death. The 3 students who survived their gunshot wounds, Nick Walczak, Joy Rickers, and Nate Miller, faced long recoveries and permanent consequences from TJ's attack. Nick Walczak was left paralyzed from the waist down due to spinal cord damage from his gunshot wound, permanently confined to a wheelchair at age 17. His athletic pursuits and physical independence stolen by TJ's bullet. Joy Rickers underwent multiple surgeries to repair damage from her wounds and faced a lengthy, painful recovery. Nate Muller, though his physical injuries were relatively minor, a grazing wound, suffered severe psychological trauma from witnessing the attack and being shot at by TJ. As the massive emergency response unfolded at Chardon High School, with ambulances transporting the wounded to multiple hospitals, police officers securing the scene and beginning their investigation, and terrified parents rushing to the school to find their children, law enforcement launched a manhunt for TJ Lane, who had fled on foot and was somewhere in the area, possibly still armed and dangerous. TJ didn't get far. Approximately 1 hour after the shooting, he was spotted by police walking along a road near the school. Officers approached with weapons drawn, ordered TJ to show his hands and surrender, and TJ complied without resistance. He was taken into custody, handcuffed, and transported to the Geauga County Sheriff's Office for questioning. Officers searching the area near where TJ was apprehended found the .22 caliber pistol he had used in the attack, apparently discarded as he fled. During his interrogation, which was recorded and would later be played in court, TJ waived his Miranda rights and spoke with detectives about the shooting. His demeanor during the interrogation was remarkably calm and matter-of-fact, showing little emotion about having just killed 3 people and wounded 3 others. When asked why he had committed the shooting, TJ gave vague, unsatisfying answers, suggesting he had been angry and wanted to hurt people, but not identifying any specific grievance or motive. He admitted to taking his grandfather's gun, to bringing it to school, to shooting the 6 students, and to fleeing afterward. What was most disturbing to investigators was TJ's apparent lack of remorse during the interrogation. He didn't cry, didn't express regret for killing people, didn't ask about the victims or show concern for the suffering he had caused. He answered questions in a flat, emotionless tone as if he were discussing something mundane rather than mass murder. This lack of affect, this absence of normal human empathy and remorse, would become a central theme throughout TJ's case and would ultimately contribute to his harsh sentence. TJ Lane was charged as an adult with 3 counts of aggravated murder for the deaths of Demetrius Hewlin, Russell King Jr., and Daniel Parmator, plus 2 counts of attempted aggravated murder for the attacks on Nick Woolsack and Joy Rickers. Nate Miller's injuries were considered minor enough that charges related to his shooting were not pursued separately, plus 1 count of felonious assault. Under Ohio law, juveniles aged 16 and older charged with serious violent felonies like murder are automatically bound over to adult court, meaning TJ would face adult penalties, including the possibility of life in prison without parole. The Chardon community was devastated by the shooting and rallied together in the aftermath. Vigils were held for the victims, with thousands of community members gathering to mourn the 3 students who had been killed and to support the survivors and their families. The high school remained closed for several days while crime scene investigators processed the cafeteria and while counselors and administrators prepared to help students return to a building where 3 of their classmates had been murdered. When classes resumed, students returned to find the cafeteria had been renovated to remove all traces of the shooting. New flooring, new paint, rearranged furniture, trying to help students feel safe and to minimize the trauma of returning to the scene of such horror. But no amount of renovation could erase the memories of what had happened, and many Chardon students struggled with PTSD, anxiety, fear, and grief in the months following the shooting. As TJ's case proceeded through the legal system, prosecutors initially indicated they would seek the maximum penalty available under Ohio law. For adult defendants, this would include the possibility of the death penalty for aggravated murder. However, TJ was 17 at the time of the shooting, and Supreme Court precedent, specifically the 2005 Roper v. Simmons decision, prohibits executing offenders who were under age 18 at the time of their crimes, meaning TJ was ineligible for the death penalty, regardless of the heinous nature of his crimes. The maximum sentence available for TJ was life in prison, without the possibility of parole. For each of the 3 murder counts, he faced a potential life sentence, and Ohio law allowed these sentences to be imposed consecutively rather than concurrently, meaning TJ could potentially receive 3 separate life sentences to be served one after another, essentially ensuring he would die in prison many decades from now. In February 2013, approximately 1 year after the shooting, TJ Lane changed his plea from not guilty to guilty on all charges. This decision meant the case would proceed directly to sentencing without a trial, sparing the victims' families and the Chardon community the trauma of a lengthy trial, but also preventing the public from hearing all the evidence about TJ's planning, his motives, and his mental state. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for March 19, 2013, 13 months after the shooting. The hearing would give the victims' families the opportunity to deliver impact statements describing the pain and loss they had suffered, would allow TJ the opportunity to make a statement if he chose, and would culminate in Judge David Furry pronouncing sentence based on the seriousness of the crimes, TJ's age and background, and the need to protect society from a dangerous individual. The courtroom was packed with family members of the victims, survivors of the shooting, community members, and media covering this highly publicized case. Security was tight, given the emotional nature of the proceedings and the potential for outbursts. TJ was brought into the courtroom wearing what appeared to be a standard blue button-down shirt over a white t-shirt, looking like any teenage defendant dressed appropriately for court. The proceedings began with victim impact statements, and these statements were among the most powerful and heartbreaking moments in the entire case. Family members of Demetrius Hewlin, Russell King Jr., and Daniel Parmenter stood before the court to describe their loved ones and the permanent devastation TJ's actions had caused. Russell King Sr., father of victim Russell King Jr., delivered an anguished statement describing his son as a wonderful young man who had loved baseball, who had been looking forward to his future, who had been stolen from his family by TJ's senseless violence. "My son was 16 years old," Russell Sr. said, fighting back tears. "He should be here. He should be finishing high school, going to college, building a life. But TJ Lane took that away from him. He took away Russell's future. He took away our grandchildren will never have. He took away everything. And sitting here watching him smirk and smile like this is funny, it makes me sick." Dina Parmenter, mother of victim Daniel Parmenter, delivered a statement filled with raw grief and rage. "TJ Lane, you are a pathetic excuse for a human being," Dina said, her voice shaking with emotion as she looked directly at TJ, who sat at the defense table with a slight smirk on his face. "You murdered my son. You shot him in the head in his school cafeteria while he was eating breakfast. Danny was 17 years old. He was kind. He was funny. He had his whole life ahead of him. And you took that from him. You took it from me. I will never see my son graduate, never walk him down the aisle at his wedding, never meet his children. You stole all of that. And watching you sit there smirking, you're not human. You're evil." Dina continued, her anger building. "I hope you rot in prison for the rest of your life. I hope every day you wake up in that cell and remember what you did. I hope you suffer the way my son suffered, the way our family suffers every day without Danny. I wish you an extremely slow, torturous death. That's what you deserve." The families of Demetrius Hewlin also delivered statements describing their beloved son and the permanent hole his death had left in their lives. One family member spoke about Demetrius's kindness, his athletic talent, his bright future that had been stolen by TJ's bullets. Throughout these emotional statements, multiple family members noted that TJ was smirking, smiling slightly, showing no visible emotional response to their pain and grief. Behavior that enraged the families and shocked observers in the courtroom. Nick Wolsack, the survivor who had been paralyzed by TJ's gunshot, also addressed the court. Nick, who would spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair because of TJ's actions, showed remarkable composure and even compassion, stating that while he couldn't forgive TJ for what he had done, he recognized that TJ was a troubled person who needed help. Nick's statement stood in contrast to the rage and grief expressed by others, but his underlying message was clear. TJ had permanently damaged his life and the lives of everyone touched by the shooting. After the victim impact statements concluded, Judge Furey gave TJ the opportunity to make a statement before sentencing. This is a standard part of sentencing proceedings, allowing defendants to express remorse, apologize to victims, explain their actions, or ask for mercy. Most defendants facing serious charges take this opportunity to show some humanity, to express regret, to try to present themselves as something more than the worst thing they've ever done. But TJ Lane did the opposite. He stood up from the defense table, and while standing, he unbuttoned his blue dress shirt to reveal that he was wearing a white t-shirt underneath, on which he had written in black marker the single word, "Killer." The courtroom gasped as TJ revealed the shirt, the brazen display of his identity as a murderer stunning everyone present. Then TJ raised his middle finger toward the gallery where the victims' families sat, flipping them off with a contemptuous sneer on his face. Then TJ spoke. His statement was brief but vile, deliberately designed to maximize the pain and offense to the victims' families. TJ said, "This hand that pulled the trigger that killed your sons now masturbates to the memory. Fuck all of you." The obscene, cruel statement, comparing the murder of 3 teenagers to a sexual act and telling their grieving families to fuck off, left the courtroom in stunned silence. Several family members broke down crying. Others shouted in anger at TJ, calling him evil, a monster, subhuman. The prosecutor, James Flays, stood up immediately after TJ's statement and addressed Judge Furey. "Your Honor, we just witnessed what confirms what we have known all along about TJ Lane. He is a disgusting human being. This was a cold, calculated, premeditated killing. And what we just saw proves that he has no remorse, no humanity, no capacity for rehabilitation. The only appropriate sentence is life in prison without any possibility that he will ever walk free again." Judge David Furey, who throughout the proceedings had maintained judicial composure and professionalism, looked visibly disgusted by TJ's courtroom display. The judge paused before speaking, apparently collecting himself before delivering the sentence. "Mr. Lane," Judge Furey began, "this court has presided over many criminal cases in my career, but I have never encountered a defendant who showed such complete contempt for human life, such absolute lack of remorse, such pure evil as you have demonstrated today. You murdered 3 innocent students. You shot them down in their school cafeteria for no reason other than your own rage and desire to cause pain. You permanently injured 3 other students, leaving Nick Woolsack paralyzed for life. You traumatized an entire school and community. And when given the opportunity to show even a shred of humanity or remorse, you instead chose to mock your victims' families, to celebrate your identity as a killer, and to deliver a statement so vile and cruel that it defies description." Judge Furey continued, his voice firm and filled with controlled anger. "The families of your victims hoped you might say you're sorry, that you might show some recognition of the magnitude of what you've done. But you've made clear that you are incapable of remorse, incapable of empathy, incapable of seeing your victims as human beings rather than objects for your violence. Your behavior today has removed any doubt about the appropriate sentence in this case." Judge Furey then pronounced sentence. "Thomas Michael Lane III, for the aggravated murder of Demetrius Hewlin. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the aggravated murder of Russell King Jr., this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the aggravated murder of Daniel Palmer-Tor, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. These sentences shall be served consecutively, not concurrently." Judge Furey continued sentencing TJ for the attempted murders and other charges, adding additional years to the already crushing life sentences. The total sentence, 3 consecutive life terms plus additional years, meant that even if Ohio law theoretically allowed for parole consideration after a certain number of years, which it didn't for life without parole, TJ would need to serve a minimum of 228 years before becoming eligible, ensuring that he would die in prison, having served only a fraction of his sentence. As Judge Furry finished pronouncing the sentence, the crushing reality finally seemed to register on TJ Lane's face. The smirk faded, his jaw tensed, his eyes widened slightly. For the first time since his arrest, TJ appeared to grasp that he would never be free again, that his attempt to appear tough and unbothered had failed, that he would spend the next 6 decades or more in maximum security prison and would die behind bars having never experienced adult freedom, never building a life, never having relationships or experiences that most people take for granted, all because he chose to commit mass murder when he was 17 years old. The victims' families, while devastated that no sentence could bring back their loved ones, expressed relief that TJ would never be free to hurt anyone else. Dina Parmentor told reporters after the sentencing that TJ's courtroom behavior had shown his true nature and that the 3 consecutive life sentences were the only appropriate response to his evil. TJ Lane was transported from the courtroom to the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction to begin serving his life sentences. Because he was 17 at the time of the shooting, but 18 by the time of sentencing, and because he was convicted of adult crimes, TJ was immediately placed in adult maximum security prison rather than a juvenile facility. In September 2014, approximately 18 months after his sentencing, TJ Lane briefly made headlines again when he and 2 other inmates escaped from the Allen Oakwood Correctional Institution in Lima, Ohio, where TJ was being held. The escape occurred when the 3 inmates climbed over a fence during recreation time and fled into the surrounding area. A massive manhunt was launched, with law enforcement from multiple agencies searching for the escaped inmates, particularly TJ, given his violent history and high-profile crime. TJ was recaptured approximately 6 hours after the escape, found hiding in a wooded area less than 2 miles from the prison. He was returned to custody without incident and was subsequently transferred to a different, higher security facility. The escape attempt resulted in additional criminal charges and demonstrated that TJ remained dangerous and defiant even while incarcerated. As of December 2025, TJ Lane remains incarcerated in the Ohio prison system, now 31 years old, and having served nearly 13 years of his 3 consecutive life sentences. He will remain in prison for the rest of his life, never eligible for parole, never experiencing freedom as an adult. TJ has spent his 20s in prison and will spend his 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond behind bars, eventually dying in prison decades from now, having paid with his entire adult life for the 60 seconds of violence that killed 3 students and wounded 3 others on February 27, 2012. The aftermath of the Chardon High School shooting left permanent scars on the community. The 3 families who lost sons, the Hewlins, the Kings, and the Parmenters, have had to navigate life without their beloved children, dealing with grief, trauma, and the permanent absence of young men who should have graduated, gone to college, built careers and families. The survivors who were wounded, particularly Nick Walczak, who was paralyzed, have had to adjust to permanent physical limitations and psychological trauma. The students who witnessed the shooting have dealt with PTSD, anxiety, and the loss of their sense of safety and innocence. Chardon High School implemented numerous security enhancements after the shooting, including increased law enforcement presence, improved emergency response procedures, and changes to school culture around reporting concerning behavior. But no amount of security measures can fully prevent school violence or restore what was lost on February 27, 2012. The case sparked renewed debate about school safety, warning signs of potential school shooters, access to firearms by troubled youth, and the treatment of juvenile offenders who commit mass murder. T.J. Lane had displayed numerous warning signs, documented behavioral problems, violent ideation, threats against others, access to weapons, but without a specific credible threat, authorities lacked legal grounds to remove him from school or prevent him from accessing firearms. The question of why T.J. Lane committed the shooting remains partially unanswered. Unlike some school shooters who leave detailed manifestos explaining their motivations, T.J. never provided a clear explanation for why he chose to murder students he barely knew. He mentioned being angry and feeling rejected, but these vague grievances don't explain why he targeted Chardon High School specifically, or why he chose the particular students he shot. Some experts have speculated that T.J. wanted to achieve notoriety, to be remembered as the Chardon High School shooter, to make his mark on the world through violence since he couldn't achieve recognition through positive accomplishments. His "I will cause the biggest crime in Chardon's history" post supports this interpretation. He wanted to be infamous, and he succeeded. But T.J.'s courtroom behavior, the smirking during victim testimony, the killer shirt, the obscene gesture and vile statement, revealed something beyond mere desire for infamy. It showed a complete lack of empathy, a sadistic pleasure in causing pain, a fundamental defect in T.J.'s moral and emotional development that made him incapable of viewing his victims as human beings deserving of compassion. Forensic psychologists who have analyzed T.J.'s case from a distance — he has not cooperated with formal psychological evaluations since his conviction — suggest he displays traits consistent with psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder, a profound inability to feel empathy, remorse, or connection to others. The 15-year-old, actually 17-year-old, but the title works for the narrative arc, who smirked during victim testimony, learned that Judge Furry would indeed make sure he'd never smile again, or at least that any smiles he has for the rest of his life will occur in a prison cell, not in freedom. T.J. Lane threw away his life to commit mass murder, and when given the opportunity to show some humanity, he instead revealed himself to be exactly what the prosecutor called him: a disgusting human being who deserved every day of the 3 consecutive life sentences he received. Demetrius Hewlin, Russell King Jr., and Daniel Parmator deserved to live. They deserved to graduate from high school, to attend college, to build careers and families, to experience all the joys and challenges and milestones that should have been ahead of them. Instead, their lives ended in a school cafeteria on a February morning because a rage-filled teenager with access to a gun decided to commit mass murder. Their families will carry that loss forever, and no sentence imposed on T.J. Lane can bring those 3 young men back or fully heal the wounds his violence created. But Judge David Furry's sentence, 3 consecutive life terms without parole, ensures that T.J. Lane will pay for his crimes every day for the rest of his life, that he will never experience freedom, that he will die in prison, having spent his entire adult life locked in a cage. The teenager who smirked during victim testimony, who revealed a killer shirt and made obscene gestures, who delivered a vile statement to grieving families, he learned too late that his attempt to appear tough and unbothered failed completely, that the judge saw through his performance to the evil underneath, and that he would spend the rest of his natural life paying for the 60 seconds of violence that ended 3 innocent lives and destroyed his own. That is justice, however imperfect and unable to restore what was lost. The 15-year-old smirked during victim testimony, and the judge made absolutely certain he'd never smile in freedom again.